Press record. Right, we're now recording, which is, as everyone says, is a good start. Share my screen. Well, this is a little different for me today because by no real default, this is for some reason been focused on brass composers of the Salvation Army. And John Martin is a vocal composer and equally happy to take part in this mad, crazy thing. Welcome, sir. How are you?
Thank you. I'm very well. And it's good to be with you to represent the vocal composers within the Army. I'm just one of obviously several, but I hope you get some more on as well. That'd be good.
I would love to. Anyone who writes Salvation Army music is okay for me. And that applies to anybody who doesn't consider themselves a uniformed, high-neck collar, bonnet-wearing, cap-waving brigade member. Not that I wear bonnets or wave caps, but no. Yeah, well, I've had some pretty interesting replies. I'm very glad anyone wants to take part in this. So thank you for volunteering. Thank you for coming on. We had a warm-up chat which sort of covered some interesting ground. But for me, the interesting thing is, coming from a vocal point of view, is very limited in my knowledge. And I just wonder whether the parameters that we apply to band music apply to songster music, whether you're inside the Army or outside the Army. Because I can say, I know who wrote Star Lake, I know who wrote The Light of the World, and somebody may go, I know who wrote Throned in Gladness, I know who wrote Bow the Knee. But you also might get Salvation's composers say, do you know what? I haven't got a clue who wrote Bognor Regis, and I haven't got a clue who wrote Child of the Manger, but I know the piece when I hear it. So I'm going to be interesting to see how the answers sort of differ. But first of all, I've got to go back to what you would say the start. Do you come from a musical family? Was there always music around as a child?
Yes, my father was a songs leader at a corps. My home corps is Hensford in Staffordshire, which is on the edge of Cannock Chase. And my father was the songs leader. He also played in the band. And like many children growing up in the 60s and 70s, I naturally went to the Salvation Army. In fact, I went to the Army for lots of things. I went for my social life. I went to youth club, I went to the YP band practice, I went to the singing company, and then obviously graduated to the senior sections. And growing up in the 60s and 70s, to tell you the truth, we were much like any other corps in the territory. We were just smaller or larger. So music was all around. We had a piano in the house. My elder sister played the piano. So music was very much part of who I was, certainly growing up in the Army. I was surrounded by Army music, which in a sense was limited in those days because all the music we played and sang was music by the Army.
Yeah.
So whenever I played a piece of music with the YP band, which was always Unity series, it was the old orange book, and then it was the blue book, and it was very much this is an Army piece of music for an Army audience, for Army musicians. I didn't really, growing up as a young person, we didn't have a lot to do with other churches. We had lots to do with other corps, but you know, not from my perspective. It was a musical family, as lots of families were in those days.
Yeah, I tell you, although I'm probably 20 years later in that respect, I find it very interesting. I've said before on these videos that I had an invitation a few years ago to join the Hymn Society, and knowing that my mentor in all things Salvation Army song, Gordon Taylor, was a member, the amount of times that every single issue comes out with a song that's known in the church, I've heard of it in the Salvation Army. And yet I've had people come on and say, do you know what? I've heard of that, and you know, there's a Salvation Army song. How come that is not available to the the church, it would go like wildfire. But that doesn't really exist anymore. We kind of intertwine, and it's always interesting as a Salvationist to see tunes that we take for granted that they go, do you know what? I've never thought of singing that tune to that song ever. And you're like, I mean, I've never known anyone not to.
Yeah, the only song I can think of, Morvin, that has a wider connotation, and that is A Starry Night by Joy Webb.
Yeah.
And possibly Made in the Likeness of God. Certainly A Starry Night, which was written in the 60s for the Joy Strings.
Yeah.
That actually has a bigger life, probably outside of the army, because it's sung a lot in schools.
Published in the Sunday School Journal, I think. So
it possibly could be. Yeah.
I have a feeling there was a hymn book that was published for use in church schools, and it was one of the very first Salvation Army compositions published outside of IMED. So I could be wrong.
And interestingly, from a band perspective, I know that you spoke to brass band composers. Their repertoire, the canon, if you like, of brass band music of the army, has a wider appeal than our choral music. And as you said earlier, there aren't many army vocal compositions that are well known outside of the army, whereby there's lots of army brass band pieces which are well known and which are played. The Salvation Army pieces that are used for contesting these days. So we have a very smaller, if you like, market for what we write. And I guess, one of the things that is a challenge to the army is how we move our songs from the internal perspective to the outside church. We've got some fantastic composers. We always have had.
Yeah. But
the vocal music seems to be stuck in the army. And whilst that is good, there's a huge, I think, wider, obviously ecumenical music scene.
I do wonder, because I remember having a conversation years ago where it's one of these things when you really wish you write down who said it and when. So it's like, YPSM Madge said to me, but I didn't. But I always had this kind of impression on me growing up that songster brigades, they existed for two separate reasons. Number one was the new song would come out, and for, let's say, I Dare to Be Different, picking a song out of the ether, it was there to sing, to encourage the congregation to get to know it, and then it would become a congregation. We'd be singing it all the time, and everyone would get to know it, and that was the dual purpose. The other one was that the local songster brigade had the reputation of being a good choral brigade and would go out to festivals and stuff, and you'd have festival written pieces.
Yeah.
You'd have stuff written for multi-choir with all the sopranos and the vocal stuff. And I don't know to some extent whether that still exists, because you get lots of very popular pieces that just take off and get a life, as you will appreciate. You probably had it yourself, that you've had some songs that just take on a life of their own, and some songs, bury down into that, and there's no rhyme or reason. But when was the first time you kind of remember writing your first lyrics and melody for people outside of your family unit to use?
Well, growing up in Hensford, I discovered that as well as being a cornet player, I wanted to play the piano. We had a piano, but I didn't have any lessons at all, but I just liked the sound of the piano. And the core pianist, David Carroll, just was a fantastic pianist. He could play anything, but he played it in such a way that appealed to sort of my emerging interest in music and harmony and melody. I would be about 8 or 9 at this time. And I learned to play the piano in a very interesting way. I think it's interesting. Because I knew the cornet, and because I knew the treble clef, I knew what the notes were on, C, D, E, F, G. I understood what the notes were called, but I didn't know what piano music looked like. So as a 7-year-old, I used to go and stand behind David when he was playing the piano for the collection, or for the songsters. And I used to watch where he placed his hands on the piano to colorate with the notes on the page. So I knew that when I saw a C in the treble clef, I knew that he pressed his thumb or his finger on that note on the piano. Okay. So I knew that every time I saw a C in the treble clef and I was sat at the piano, I had to press that note on the piano. Now, this is without really realizing what the note was. All I knew that it was the note on the piano. Now, the treble clef, of course, which is written in a completely different key, again, I looked where he was placing his hands and the fingering on the piano, which corresponded to the bass clef. So I went home, I would get a piece of music and I sort of memorized what note where my fingers had to be when I saw a piece of music in front of me. Now that seems a very, very strange way of playing the piano, but it seemed to work for me. And so when I started to sort of write melody, it was literally me sitting at the piano, and I said the previous week, I sort of doodled, a musical doodle. I just sort of played around and just listened to what chords worked and what chords didn't. And really that was how I composed my first piece of music. Literally just by doodling.
What was it a surprise that, you know, being as you came from a musical family, you said I think you said your sister played the piano anyway, that you kind of, hang on, I've been trying this out. Would you guys mind having a go? Or was it a case of you were doodling and someone looked over your shoulder and said, come on, let's have a go?
My dad would pop in from time to time, and he probably would have been listening at the door for 15 minutes beforehand, and you know, he would probably come in at the right time. And he said, "That's interesting, son. What is it?" I said, "I don't know. I'm just..." And what we did in those days, of course, is we all the tunes that we wrote, well, certainly I wrote, we used the tune book. We used the songbook rather for the lyrics. I didn't know any lyricists at that time. It was literally, I'm writing a piece of music. Now, what fits to the melody? And my dad would come in, and I said, "Well, I'm playing this," and he said, "What are the words?" I say, "Well, they're in the songbook," and so I would write it out with pen and manuscript, and he would have tried it with the Songs Brigade at Hensford, and that's pretty much, that was my outlet to start with. You know, my dad and the Songs Brigade at Hensford.
Interesting. When you sort of started realizing that you could do this outside of a hobby and sort of take a professional interest, if you were, and that it was something that was more than just a spare time doodle, that you could actually do this on a sensible, you know, level akin to studying for medicine or whatever. How did that, who were the people, you know, were there anybody that sort of mentors, musicians that kind of helped you along the way and sort of said, yes, that's interesting, have you tried doing this? Or, you know, this is what we call harmonization, this is what we call da 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 da. Are there any people that kind of spring to mind like that?
Not really. I mean, Hensford is in the middle of Staffordshire, and there was nobody really local to me that I felt I could turn to. It was all, do I think this sounds okay? You know, do I like the tune? So it was it was an internal process. The first piece of music I wrote, I was 14, or the first piece of music that was published, I was 14 when I wrote it, and I wrote it in the key of F, because I write most things, or I did then, in the key of F or C or G, because that was, you know, like the three easiest key signatures. And I wrote it when I was 14, and I sent it to the then head of the musical department. It was Ray Stemman Allen, and it was a letter of acknowledgement, and I heard nothing until 7 years later. 7 years later, when I received a copyright form, because it was going to be published in the Musical Salvationist, as it was in those days. So I was very excited about this, you know, as you do. And I remember him saying, the last line of his letter, he said, regarding the composition, he said, "Your last line is particularly shapely." And that was about the only sort of comment I had from anybody at that point. The interesting thing was it was a song for women's voices, which in those days used to be on page 4, I think. And when it was published, I received a complimentary copy, and instead of being in the key of F, it was in the key of A major, 3 sharps with guitar chords. And because there were accidentals, I literally couldn't play it in the key that it was published.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I could eventually, but it wasn't the key of F. But I think in those days they were trying to encourage groups to sing with guitar accompaniment as well in the 70s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
But there was nobody really, to tell you the truth.
So you didn't sort of cross paths with the Kenyans, the Kenneth Downeys of the day, the Les Condons of the day. Was there any kind of music camp involvement in Staffordshire?
I mean, I went to Sunbury Court Music School and then Tilney Hall, but that was very much geared to performance. That was very much geared to playing. It was that they did not have a stream for composers as they probably do now. Okay. You know, there probably would have been lots of people like myself who were submitting music, and some of it would be published, but there was no real sense of, we think you have a gift, or we think you've got potential, we will work with you. The editorial department of those days received music, they edited it, and then they published it.
Yeah.
But there was no, I don't recall there being anybody who said, look, do it this way. I didn't know anything about harmony. I still, actually, Morven, to tell you the truth, don't know a lot about harmony at all. To me, my compositions are based around sound. Does it sound okay to me? Does that chord sound to my ears as if it works? Yeah. And if it does, then I put it in. If it doesn't, then I'll choose something else.
Do you consider yourself more the original composition to someone else's lyricism, or do you find that it's an equal balance, that if you come up, you know, the set of lyrics come with maybe a tune, or the tune comes first and you find the music, the lyrics later? Or is it a case of the flip side, is you're happy to write the music to somebody else who performs the lyrics? Is there a balance in that?
Yeah, I mean, there used to be, as I said, when I first started, literally most young people or most Salvationists sang from the 1953 songbook. We all did it. Yeah. There wasn't anything else out. I mean, Songs of Fellowship started coming in, but that was a bit later. But all the music that we had, and all the words that we had were published by Salvationists. I mean, the interesting thing about the 60s was that two crucial things happened that I think probably changed the face of Salvation Army music. One was Joy Webb and the Joy Strings.
Yeah.
And then towards the end of that decade, of course, the musicals.
Yeah. And
that sort of then suggested that music had a broader appeal because in the 60s, when the Joy Strings came on, that, you know, the Salvation Army all of a sudden had music to match the culture of the day. No longer were we existing in a subculture of a church. In other words, just music for us. The Joy Strings, and through their music, became the face, if you like, of the Salvation Army in a wider culture. And in the 60s, the swinging 60s, the permissive 60s. And every corps that I can think of got together a group of people who formed a rhythm group.
Yeah. It opened the doors, didn't it?
It opened the doors. And then,
I mean,
of course,
you say you came from Woolwich was very much the same right until the late 80s, where, I mean, Mark Harry would allude to this, and I think that gospel band who just had their 50th anniversary.
Solid Rock.
Yes, Solid Rock, thank you. They kind of opened the doors, and you had youth coming in saying, look, I can play these things.
Yes, absolutely.
It's not a case of, to misquote, you've got to conform to belong. It's oh no, if you're not playing cornet, you don't play a trombone, you don't sing alto in the songsters, you've got to do that after hours at the youth club. And,
Yeah,
you know, I mean, there's a wonderful film with Kenneth Moore where these group of people want to come in and just want to play harmless jazz. He said, look, I heard the church hall on the Thursday night. We'll be finished by 8. What happens after that? I'll be around. Help yourself, as long as you're not damaging the property and you're not being abusive, which they weren't.
Yeah, yeah.
It encouraged experimentation. And I think the Salvation Army kind of opened its doors and realised that there was nothing inherently bad. This wasn't sort of Black Sabbath and people going on and lighting skeletons and all the imagery of the Hammer horror films that we're so familiar with. And yet, why should the devil have all the best music?
I think what happened as well then with the Joy Strings and then later with the musicals is that it encouraged people to write lyrics, which helped melody writers or songwriters like myself to have a new genre of words. And so from, you know, throughout the years that I've been writing music, to answer your question, is I've normally had a set of lyrics in front of me, normally.
Yeah.
And the thing with songwriting and being a composer of choral music is that it's different from brass music because you've just got yourself. You have got a theme and you've got perhaps a hymn that you're basing your music on, but it's a joint thing. So when I write music, I am writing it as a half of a partnership.
Yeah.
And so I have a dynamic of speaking to the lyricists, and I mean, I've worked extensively with Commissioner Keith Banks, Rob Little, Steve Puxon. Those, if you like, are the 3 people I tend to work with, and they all write differently, and they all send me different sort of lyrics, and so I've got to try and get into what they are meaning by the lyrics.
Yeah.
Because they're telling a story, or they're talking about holiness, or they're talking about society. They're talking about all sorts of different things in what they write. So I have to try and work out what they mean and try to interpret what they mean through the music that I write. So it's mainly, I receive texts, you know, words,
poetry,
lyrics, and then I sit and write.
Yeah. Although you know, the technology has changed rapidly, how much of it is pen and paper even today, or is it a case of, particularly if you're given the word, go to the PC, have a doodle on the piano, and of course you can just correct, you know, the computer will write it word perfect, or is it a case of sketch it out, the melody, and then when you've got something solid, you can put it on the computer, and then okay, that doesn't quite work out. What does the formula work for you?
Well, of course, it's changed. When Sibelius came in, which I'm not too sure exactly when it was, up until that point, of course, it was literally manuscript. And that manuscript was sent to the music department. And if you kept a copy, you know, you could remember. But basically, it was, I'll play the music, I'll get a songster brigade. I was songster leader at Bristol Citadel for 5 years. And when I wrote music for them, it was very much try it out. I'll write it out longhand. I'll print it off by Roneo or whatever photocopy machines in those days. See what it sounds like. If it doesn't sound very good, I'll change that bar, I'll change that note, and then I will submit it. So it was very much trial and error. Then, of course, when Sibelius came in, Sibelius can do anything you want it to do. And so as is now, it would be pen and paper, it would be doodling or sketching out some ideas, and then going to the computer, entering it in, and then, of course, the great thing about Sibelius, you can hear it back. You know, you can play playback, and it's obvious what works and it's obvious what doesn't work, and so you just change it. That's you've still got to put the work in. You've still got to, I think, compose. I don't think I would naturally be able to compose purely on Sibelius. I would need to listen to what the sound's like in front of a keyboard, in front of a piano.
How much of that alters when you put it in front of a songs brigade or some singers and say, look, I want to try this out. No one has heard this, but can we just sort of run through this? And you get that real life kind of, oh, hang on a minute, that was all right on the computer. But as you were saying, if it doesn't feel right, it doesn't click, it's got to be changed. So you could say you could do it note perfect on the computer, but someone gets it and realize, hang on, you're expecting the sopranos to do what?
Yeah.
How much does that feed the education of a piece?
Oh, it feeds a lot in. I mean, when I was songs leader at Regent Hall, I remember I used to go to the hall from DHQ in London Central, where I was working, and I arrived about 5:30. I sat at the piano in Regent Hall, and I don't know why, but I started playing the tune of Sing Them Over Again to Me, Wonderful Words of Life.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started forming my own sort of melody to the same words, but sort of integrated with the original Sing Them Over Again to Me. And by about 7 o'clock, I had written out in SATB form the parts for this new piece called Words of Life. It's published. It's on a CD that Stuff Songsters, I think, have recorded it. And so at 7 o'clock, I'd written it out. I photocopied it for the songsters. And at 8 o'clock, when they turned up, I have a new piece. Will you sing it through? Gave them the copies. I went to the piano. I played it on the piano because I hadn't written out the piano part for the pianist.
Okay.
I heard it and I thought, yeah, okay, that works. I've got to change that. Yes, that would work. That doesn't work. But if you've got a good group of singers or brass players, and you can just, they're your guinea pigs, if you like.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. So it's a bit of trial and error, to tell you the truth. And I think as a composer, and brass composers probably would sense this, is that when you actually hear your piece of music either played or sung for the first time, it's either exactly how it should be, or no, I'm not too sure if that works.
Yeah.
And I think, to be fair, looking back, there are some pieces that I've written, even some of the pieces that are being published, that you think, I'm not too sure about that one anymore.
Do you have to develop a poker face if you're sitting in the congregation and they don't know you're there? And that's fair enough. They've put this thing on the program, and it's almost either too slow or too fast, or they've misinterpreted. And you're sitting there thinking, you're murdering this piece. There's nothing like what I thought it should be. Have you ever had that?
Yeah, when you're trained to be a Salvation Army officer, the college staff teach you to raise your eyebrows without moving your eyebrows. For such a
I'm not a Salvation Army officer, and I'm not an OK, so I claim ignorance on this.
No, but I think a lot of composers would listen to their music and think they did their best, or that was really good, or that's exactly how I wanted it to be. Yeah.
So you've been studying music for ages. You've been doodling around. You got your pieces published. So how long was it before the training college beckoned, or was it a case of you were doing a musical career, you were trained to be a postman, and then the Lord said, no, William Booth College for you, my lad? When did that decision happen?
I mean, I only got an O level in music. That's all I did. I didn't study music at all. I worked in a local council office for 5 years. I went down to Bristol to work in the Salvation Army hostel. I worked for the career service, and then I was 33 when I entered the training college. I think at the back of my mind there was always that sense that I would go to the training college. Lots of people growing up in the 60s will remember the name of Bill Snape, who was Lieutenant Colonel. He was Divisional Young People Secretary in the North Staffs Division. And he came to me when I was about, 10 or 11. And as he probably said to everybody of that age, one day you will be an officer. It was the things that people from DHQ said to youngsters like myself. And it was a gradual sense of, this is where I'm going to go. And so that's what happened. And of course, I've been an officer ever since.
Yeah. Does that, how do you balance your life? Because are you good with a deadline, or are you preferred to say, if someone comes to you and says, we need a new song, and, it's kind of, you got the freedom to let the imagination flow? or is it a case of, look, this is for Christmas this year, you've got 4 months, can you do it or not? Which, you know, do you just like the pressure, or you say, do you know what, when it's ready, you'll have it?
It's very interesting because composing music is not my job. You know, I've been an officer, and your appointment is the main priority. Your people is the main priority. So I used to I still try to play and sit at the piano every day. And so for me, playing the piano and then composition was relaxing. It was it taking me away from my appointment in a sense, but also using my appointment and the, you know, what was happening in my life spiritually, what was happening in society, to be informed about what would work in the context of Christian worship. And that's, I think, where the words come in. I think melody is important, but I think words are far more important for a choir, for the songster brigade, because, you know, you want to communicate what's happening through the words. If the melody is good, and if there's a natural marrying, a very good marry between the words and the lyric, that's fantastic. So I worked very much on a, if you need it by, you know, the 7th of July, that's great. That gives me a deadline. So, for example, you know, I've written a couple of sessional songs with Rob Little, and, you know, there was a deadline.
Yes.
You know, we need it for Welcome Weekend. And so it's very much of getting your head down when you can and just ploughing on. When I was the choir officer at Woking, I wrote a song for the whole congregation to sing for Christmas, a new Christmas carol, if you like.
Ooh, so sacrilege!
That was a very, you know, right. I've got to write it because Advent Sunday is beginning of December or whatever. You know, I need this song from music school. Can you write me this because I'm getting married? So it's one of those interesting things. My daughter Catherine, or our daughter Catherine, was getting married. It's had to be postponed, and she wanted me to write the music for her to come into. And it's not a choral piece, but it's a piece of music on the piano that I had to write. So there was a deadline. So it's, you know, deadlines are good. And because it's not
in mind that I would guess that you'd be walking down the aisle at the same time.
Somebody else is playing the piano.
Hang on, darling. Diddle it.
Yeah.
We wish your daughter all the best in her.
Thank
you. Yeah, please give her the best from the Salvation Army music collection for when it does happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's how often does the are you a lyrics and melody man for your publications?
Hardly ever.
I know you do a lot of melody, but there are a couple of JMs on the page. Is it just because you prefer to let somebody else do the writing, or is it just because on those occasions the inspiration came, or someone said, no, I want you to write the lyrics as well?
Nobody has ever asked me to write lyrics.
Really? Floodgates open.
So I think probably because at the time it seemed to work that you know, the lyrics would have come to me and I would have written the music at the same time. But that's not a strength of mine, I don't think. Or words that perhaps for a chorus I would feel quite happy about writing, but certainly not 3 verses and a chorus, I don't think, not really.
Obviously having it published is a very blessed thing. And as we've alluded to before, in the Salvation Army, we are an international movement, which means that the restrictions between territories are sort of lifted. So, as you said, when you're a kid, you play the Unity, you play the Triumphs, you don't play USA Southern, you don't play Australian Arthur Gulledge. Now that's possible.
Sure.
So, where have you had an email from that's really surprised you and saying, you know, the Romanian staff songsters have been singing such and such, or, you know, you could understand maybe the Sydney staff songsters doing it, but has there ever been a comment about a piece and has really kind of caught you off guard because you wouldn't have expected that?
I think when you write music, you send it in and you know, as composers do, and if it's published, and then literally you don't quite know where it's going to go. You don't know who buys it. You don't know if anybody's using it. You might see a video or a clip from somewhere that is used.
Yeah.
The surprising thing for me is that I get a CD occasionally, and there's one of my pieces on, and I didn't even know that they'd recorded it, or possibly where they got the music from. The Amsterdam Staff Songsters recorded a piece of music called Everlasting, and I still don't know how. This was before it was published. I don't know where they got the manuscript from, and instead of it being SATB, they'd made it into a duet with a trombone obligato. It was fantastic, but I don't know how they got it. So it's very interesting when you write music, you literally leave it, you present it. I'm probably not exactly fed up with it, but I've worked on it, and then you let it go. You let it go to the music department. They publish it, they let it go, and then you don't really know what's going to happen to it.
Is there any particular composition of your own that, yes, they're all wonderful and lovely, and we fully acknowledge that, but is there anyone that kind of happened because of a unique occasion in your life that you felt, do you know what, yeah, that's got sparkle dust on it? That means, like, if you got run over by a bus tomorrow, that would be the one that you thought, perfect. I can live with a composer because I've done that piece of music. Is there any one of your pieces that would fit the bill, or not?
I think composers, we do it, I think, because we love the Lord. I think we do it because we feel we can contribute something to the life and witness and the mission of the army. And so it's very difficult to look back and think of a particular piece of music. I remember the story of a piece of music that has been sung quite a lot, called Throned in Majesty. I know that the Staff Songsters use it quite extensively on their Sunday morning before they start worship. And they've used it.
Colin Fairclough, 1996.
That's right. Now, the story of that is that back in the 1990s, Salvation Army officers and their families used to go to Cliff House in Bournemouth quite a lot for the holidays. It was a Salvation Army holiday home, and officers.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, a cheaper rate, and lots of families used to go and take advantage of the hospitality in Cliff House. And Colin Fairclough was there at the time, and in the conservatory, the Sun Lounge at Cliff House, there was a 2-manual organ, and I used to go and just play along. And Colin came in one day and said, "What are you playing?" I said, "I don't know. I'm just sort of doodling." He said, "Well, is it a song?" I said, "Well, I suppose it could be." I'd never met Colin before, by the way. And he said, "Well, do you mind if I write some words?" I said, "No, of course not." So during that week, while we were together, we would meet together, and the germ, if you like, of that song came from that holiday that Colin Fairclough, Lieutenant Colonel Colin, and myself were at, and that was the birth, if you like, of a song that probably would be one that I would be really pleased with. The other story of that is that it was being used at the Bandmasters Songster Leaders Council's Festival, and
very auspicious occasion.
Yeah, Trevor Mass Chorus, and Trevor Davies said, "We like the song, but we needed to change key for the last verse, to lift it." And I think it's written in C, and then it went into D, and I was trying to work out how it could be, and I simply could not get the modulation right. I just couldn't do it. And I remember Richard Phillips, who would have been working in the department at the time, constructed the 8 bars between the first 2 verses and the 3rd verse, and he just used chords to go from one key to another. And so 8 bars of that song actually belongs to Richard. But that's probably a song that's I suppose has done okay.
Yeah, I mean, you've alluded to the fact that you've written Christmas pieces. How difficult is that from a Christmas perspective? Because you will probably mirror my experiences on this, that the Christmas Carol concert, to misquote Morecambe and Wise, you could sing them all in a different order at a different time, and as long as you sing the big favourites, no one cares. But to include a new Christmas Carol or arrangement is almost kind of why, when we've already got Away in a Manger, Silent Night, and the First Noel. How do you bring a freshness to a new Christmas song, knowing that, you know what, it may get used once or it may get dragged out by the international songsters? I mean, Christmas seems to be a very easy time if you're a brass composer, because everyone under the sun can do an arrangement of "O Come All Ye Faithful." But to do a new Christmas carol or a new Christmas song that's not an arrangement of Away in a Manger or Silent Night is a whole different ball game.
It is, and I think that season has been well served by John Rutter,
yeah,
who has indeed over the last 30, 40 years introduced new music, new songs for Christmas time. Joy Webb did it with A Starry Night, but I mean, Christmas is such a special time, and I keep asking myself the question, what is the music of the Salvation Army? What's it for? And I think the music of the Salvation Army is for the mission of the Salvation Army. Now, if the mission of the Salvation Army, and you will have, most corps will have their own mission statement, but to use a generic mission statement, which is to save souls, grow saints, and serve suffering humanity, I'm trying to work out where is the new music that would reach those three concepts, if you like. And I think Christmas time is an ideal opportunity to save souls. It's also a great opportunity to serve suffering humanity, because the band tend to be more visible. We have more people coming into our halls at Christmas time than probably any other time. So I think the challenge is pretty much a challenge for the lyricists to write words for Christmas, and then for the composers to adapt and to work out the melody. So that, I mean, at Woking, for example, it was for congregational use. So the melody had to be fairly, if not easy, fairly memorable, catchy. 16 bars, and that was the way that we did it. So I think Christmas is not only a challenge, but it's a fantastic opportunity, probably the best opportunity. The Christmas Carol concert at the Royal Albert Hall that the Salvation Army has is probably the best attended Salvation Army music event. And you've got the two staff sections and, you know, the best musicians, if you like, that the Army can give. And that's a fantastic opportunity to introduce new music, a new repertoire to those people who attend, who are mainly non-Salvationist.
Yeah. I think what's been interesting from my point, I mean, I remember when New Christmas Praise came out.
Oh, yeah.
And unlike the vocal edition, the band edition had, and I remember sitting in the band practice, getting the new, when Santa got stuck up the chimney and the Christmas Tree Carol, and we're like, oh, can we play these out on the street corner, because people will know things like Winter Wonderland. I was like, oh, the advert with the perfume uses that, so you're clicking into sort of the modern idiom that we're not just playing and singing the same 6 songs, which, to be honest, I can't stand, but I bow to the thing. And I find it very interesting that a lot of the composers have said that it's a lot, I don't mean it's easier in the sense of safety catch off, done, but the opener or the concert interval backup, it's a 2-3 minute lollipop that introduces the immediacy of the words, and they can pump them out because they're fast, they're furious, and they're done, and they'll get used and used again. And with songsters, you probably have the same idiom where you can have the grand call thing which uses all the talent and all the respective bits of the choir, and you can say, look, this is going to be used by Boscombe songsters. I know Boscombe songsters have got this, and this, and we can tailor for that. You've also got to bear in mind that Pendlebury songsters down the road who've only got 6 singers might want to have a crack at the same thing.
Sure.
How do you balance that need for, you know, the top brass to the quintet in the local corps from a choral point of view?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of theology in when Santa got stuck up the chimney, to tell you the truth. So that's not going to save anybody. I think this is where brass and choral differ. I think when I was at Regent Hall, when we go on the open air marches down Oxford Street, we're playing Salvation Army music. But for a lot of people who are listening, it could be anything. It's just march music. I think when we are singing to a group of Christians or non-Christians, we have to be very careful about choice, about repertoire. And I think we don't tend to have lollipop songs in the choral tradition, I don't think.
Really?
Well, I
can think of a few that I could name as lollipops.
Go on then.
Now they've completely gone.
I mean,
not I Dare to Be Different, but like Do Lord. What's that I Ever Song? I felt a new and loving touch.
Oh yes.
Heart and soul.
Yeah. A miracle.
A miracle.
See, yeah, a miracle. A miracle. Yeah. God's Holy Spirit came, and we are not the same. But I mean that's actually in the songbook, so it does have words. The best sort of lollipop I can think of is the arrangement that the Staff Songsters sing of Light Walk. Ooh. Which is do bop, do bop, do, you know, do bop. There's no words. It's just a sort of, and the one that Norman, just like John, you know, where words are, they might be part of it, but it's more of a performance piece, which sort of excites people and gets people involved. So I think it's very difficult in terms of the vocal repertoire to get something that actually communicates with people.
Hang on. My computer's playing silly tricks. Yeah, it's all right. I've just had a pop-up come up. No, it's all right. I've got it back. Carry on.
What was I saying?
Yes, it's vocal lollipops.
Yeah, it's more difficult, I think, from the choral tradition, from the Songs Brigade, to do something that's more perhaps creative vocally. I mean, back in the day, you used to have elocution, you know, somebody that would give an elocution, or somebody would give a trombone solo, or you'd have an instrumental, or a pianist would play a solo, just to, you know, instead of just having singing all the time. Yeah. And that would be the same when the brass band festivals, you used to have somebody used to play the piano or do elocution, you know.
Oh, the one I was thinking on was Don't Despair.
Don't Despair.
Turn around and see, which is a light, I don't say it's a heavy sort of thing. It's what I like call a light, fluffy piece that most people will latch onto. And I remember when To God Be the Glory came out, we, you know, because it was so catchy, we learned it very rapidly. And I think I sort of term them as lollipops, that they're not the Awakeners, they're not, you know, Grand Norman Bearcroft Calvary tracks thing. It's something that, I mean, I think, what's Barbara Allen singing? Pasadena Western Songsters, when they visited London for the Congress, I think they came to Regent Hall, which is where I saw them. They'd done this sort of impromptu jazz number in the middle of the pavement, and it was catchy and it caught the attention. And, you know, yes, you can have this kind of grand devotional Albert Osborne cross thing, which, you know, it is well with my soul. But, you know, then you say, don't despair, turn around, from the first Hallelujah, you know. So every time, like, you've got those, what may sound like Wonders Begin, there's little lollipops where the interval's over, you can come back. As a composer, does it just really depend on the time and the motif as to whether it's a jolly, simple, quick piece, or whether someone said, I want to set Psalm 120, you know, I've rearranged it to lyrics, can you melodize it? It's a devotional piece, or we want this as a prayerful piece. How does the difference strike you as a composer?
I think it's almost always to do with the lyric. What is the lyric saying? Does the lyric suggest a devotional piece? Does the lyric suggest a fast piece? Does the lyric suggest an appeal? Is it to do with the heart? Is it to do with the head? Is it going to challenge me? Is the lyric going to speak to somebody in the meeting? Or is it one that can be learned very, very quickly, and like the ones that you've said, and you hear it at a congress and then everybody sings it?
Yeah.
What happens now, of course, Morven, is that, you know, we access music in all sorts of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
We hear it on the internet. We hear somebody sing it in a worship chorus. And then sort of 2 weeks later, we know the song.
Yeah.
And this is the challenge, I think, for not just the church, especially for the Salvation Army, is that by the time composers like myself have got it down to the music department and it's gone through the process of editorial, and then it gets published, and then it gets printed, and then it goes to the brigades, it's 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, whereby a lot of music these days, you can click, you can publish it, you can get a lead sheet, and you can sing it in your church, in your corps 2 or 3 weeks later.
Yeah.
So I think where you know, technology is fantastic, of course it is, and it's the immediacy. I think everybody wants to have it now. You know, I've heard this song. When can I sing it? Mm-hmm. If you've got a pianist who can pick it up and you play it on 2 or 3 hearings, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I was listening to Regent Hall this morning on you know, their worship and their non-brass worship group. You know, they're zooming, they're playing this piece of music remotely. You know, 9 of them, and it's absolutely fantastic how technology has moved on so quickly that the accessibility of music is quite interesting.
Does that have a negative? Because I remember having a conversation not too many moons ago, I think latter part of last year, and I think I'd been to Regent Hall for a Sunday morning meeting, and coming from Woodbridge, I was just, although I knew Regent Hall and I've worshipped at Regent Hall before, I think you'd had a lot of music groups that had just had a profound effect that Sunday morning, and they'd all kind of really molded together in a really kind of way. And I think a friend of mine had said, do you know what, I don't know where he went, and he didn't say, he said, do you know what, it was almost to say, he said, I found it was a bit of a circus act. That the one thing the corps officer had to crowbar in was, you had the male voice choir, you had the singing company, you had the songs brigade, you had the band, you had the worship band, you had the so-and-so. By 11:30, we'd had 2 minutes of Bible reading, and the corps officer had to crowbar the message in because there was so much to compact in. I hadn't really thought about that, but I do wonder whether that's a worry in vocal groups and in music groups, that we want to portray the message and we want it to be relevant. But, you know, it's got to fit in with the general thing. I mean, I think I wish I could have gone back and said, look, this is the Regent Hall example. And to me, that is just brilliant. That worked fantastically. Yeah. They all know how to gel in. They're not going, get out of the way, I want my 3 minutes now kind of thing. But from someone who's had to program, you know, so you're a songster leader and performing in songsters, you know, what's the important thing to you when you're doing programming and you've got this new piece, you also want to play to the traditionals? How do you compare the two?
I think you have to be fairly flexible, and one of the great things about staff songsters and the staff band is that they have a fairly broad appeal, because they do have repertoire from, you know, the gems and the old festival series pieces that appeal to a certain group of people. But then they would also go to new compositions and original compositions, and I think Regent Hall, in a sense, is a difficult place, because it's not a difficult place, but it's an interesting example, because there's so many fine musicians, and a lot of them are not just brass players; they're guitar players, they're soloists. The challenge for me when I was a songs leader at Regent Hall is to not keep all the soloists happy, but I was sport for choice. Literally, I could have had a soloist on the programs, and we did quite a lot of work on weekends and Saturday nights, and we recorded a CD, and I tried to mix and match. I tried to use different soloists, I tried to use different pianists, I tried to keep everybody happy, but acknowledging that actually they are gifted people, they are giving their talents to the Lord. How can I best use them? But primarily, what is the mission? What is the mission? What is the mission of Regent Hall Songsters? Is it to save souls? Yes. Is it to grow saints? Yes. Is it to serve suffering humanity? Yes. But how do we do that? What songs can I use? What brass pieces can I use? And probably that's the one area of concern that I would probably have now. as I probably did have then as well, how do we reach suffering humanity? Where's the songs in our songbook that talk about that? There's lots of songs about salvation, lots of songs about holiness. I think I looked actually earlier on today, I think I found about 12, just 12 out of over 1,000. Now, somebody will probably say, no, there's lots more than that, but specifically to do with suffering humanity. And of course, we're in a generation and a society today where we really do need to reach out to people. I'm thinking, what music can we use in our social centres? How can the music of the Salvation Army help in our dealings with modern slavery?
Yeah.
It's going to be words, yes, but how can the musicians of the army support the mission of the army, which includes obviously suffering humanity? It's interesting.
I do wonder, because I mean, as a vocal composer, are you aiming for, obviously the music takes on, you're looking at the lyrics.
Yeah.
And okay, this is going to be an International Staff Songster-piece. This is going to be a Bexley Heath Songster-piece.
Yeah.
Or do you have, I don't know, because obviously in band music, you can go, okay, this is written for a cornet trio with a unity band rather than festival series band where the sky's the limit. So you can say this arrangement of Jesus Loves Me, we can arrange that for a cornet duet, and the Old People's Home in the afternoon, you can sit there with 3 or 4 players and do a lovely little cornet duet that's designed for Old People's Homes. How does that work on the vocal side? Because you can take in half a dozen singers who can literally just pick up the songbook and sing How Great Thou Art. But you say, do you know what? We've got a lot of people in there who are suffering from dementia, so you may want to include a bit of Elvis or a bit of Dean Martin or something, because that's what they would remember. But you haven't got the same kind of 3 players and a quintet unity series. How do you do unity series band for a vocal side? What's the comparison?
Well, that's really interesting because
I don't know. I'm asking the vocal experts.
Yeah, I mean, Unity Series is the best-selling band journal we have, because most bands would play Unity Series music as opposed to Triumph General, and there'd be very few who now play the Judd Street Collection, I would imagine. But Sing to the Lord is a vocal publication which includes some easy pieces or easier pieces, and then some that are very technical. And so there is no real Unity Series for songster brigades. You have to buy the Sing to the Lord, and there will be music there that you can use. So it's very difficult. I think as a composer, I just have to be true to myself, and I have to compose what I'm happy composing. Sometimes it's technical, sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it's easy. And I think the key really these days is melody, to have a memorable melody, but also a memorable lyric. And if you get the two together, and probably Gowans and Larson were probably the best for this, you could listen to a Gowans and Larson and a Joy Webb, and you could immediately sing it. It was so profound and so musical. Sorry?
Unless it comes from Son of Man, that's virtually unknown in the Gowans and Larson for some reason. Even so, the songs that you could just pick up and sing, very, very, that they were the masters at great songs, great depth of word, of lyric, but also melody and, a memorable tune. So it is a challenge. I'm not too sure if I don't think I ever get it right. I think I just have to write with what's in front of me, and who knows what's going to happen to it. So when you were the songster leader, was there a temptation of saying, who said, John, can we not have 3 Martin pieces again? We need to concentrate on the new Ballantyne, the Downey arrangement. Was it, how did you manage to resist the temptation to sort of bring them a new piece every week and sort of spend half the practice going, right, this is the new song?
It was all behind my back what people said. People would never come to me and say, I think there's too many. No, I think I used to enjoy writing pieces for Regent Hall because they were just fine musicians, and I knew that they would pretty much be able to sing anything that I put in front of them.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to spend a long time, really with rhythms. The pianists were great. the vocalists were fantastic. The soloists were great. So it was a real pleasure. Actually, that helped me because I could be fairly ambitious in the spectrum of what I was writing, because they were, you know, I was confident that they could sing.
When was the first time you went from being a player, a singer, to being the conductor in the songsters?
Well, that was Bristol.
Having someone saying, "This is your piece, you conduct it."
Yeah, that was. I think that might have been my dad. I think that might have been my dad. You know, in some of my early, when I was 15, 16, I think he would have said, "Come on, son, you know, have a go."
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I was taught conducting particularly. I would have waved my arms about without really knowing too much what was happening, but the pianist would obviously keep the thing going. So yeah, probably when I was growing up as a teenager in my home corps.
Yeah. Who the music in the army? Who are the musicians, the composers that you enjoy listening to and playing and conducting? You know, the other composer. I'll get the teeth right in a minute. Composers. You know, if the music comes out, I understand the new Ballantyne, the new Downey, the new Andrew Blythe. I think, yeah, this is going to be good.
Well,
it's not that mark of quality.
Yeah, those three that you mentioned, actually, and others. I mean, as a brass player, I love playing in bands, and anything by Wilf Heaton, I would just find incredibly fantastic. He had a limited repertoire, we know that in the army, but I love listening to his music. His music's very difficult to play, of course.
I've been told that, yeah.
Most of it. But yeah, Eric Ball, Ray Steadman Allen, Les Condon, just you know, those, Norman Bearcroft, all those that you have got a reputation for fine compositions. You know, they are definitely on my list.
Yeah. Does that apply to the vocal side as well?
I like what the Andrew Mayer and Andrew Maycock are writing. Lee Fisher, you know, those sort of people. Andrew Wicker, you know, they're bringing a creativity and a sort of a freshness to the repertoire. Yeah, it's the thing with the army is that it's fantastic that every generation produces crops of brass composers and vocal composers, not just from this country, but from all over, you know. And so I'm very proud of, and I'm very encouraged by all the younger people who are writing for the army.
Yeah,
you know.
This probably depends on the time of day it happens. Favorite Salvation Army song of the moment? Because I think most people would say that it's almost impossible to have some song that just haunts you for your life. So, you know, when you woke up yesterday morning, what was the one that's sort of been on your brain that you've really enjoyed and thought, yeah, that's if I had to pick one?
It tends to be, yeah, it's very difficult to pin it down. I mean, the melodies that come back are things like "Let the Morning Bring" by Len Ballantyne. You know, different pieces that he's written, but it's very eclectic. You know, I'm listening to all sorts of music. My daughter Imogen, she's introducing me to all sorts of newer music and new Christian music and pop music that I've never heard of before. So it's a real mixture. I'm not too sure if I can pin it down, to tell you the truth.
Well, I missed this question out really, but when you're sitting down at the piano and you've got to compose a new melody to Stephen Foxton's wonderful lyrics, how do you clean the palette, knowing that Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, the Radio 2 is constantly on in the background? How do you clean the musical palette so you're not subconsciously doing the latest, you know, jingle from Radio 2 kind of thing?
Yeah, it's probably the location where I write music. I write music at a keyboard, or I write music at Sunbury Court, which is where I work part-time at the moment. So
lucky person.
Sorry?
I've only ever been there once, so.
Well, yeah, there's a number of pianos, but there's one particular piano in the conference centre that I use that I just, there's nobody there. And I make sure that there's nobody there. And so it's a holy place, because it's where they, until recently, have elected a general.
Yeah.
So it's a spiritual place. It's a place where the spirit resides, and so I find that a wonderful resource and a wonderful place to, if you like, cleanse the palate and start with a blank piece of paper and literally with the A4 lyrics in front of me. And then I see what happens. It's time given over to God. It's time given over to inspiration. It's time given over now to how can I make that word, that lyric, speak to the people that it's going to be sung to eventually, hopefully one day.
So, I mean, obviously, we're all being confined to barracks, and the usual flight of the wings of Christianity have been curtailed, and we've had to sort of adapt and learn. Has this meant that things on the back burner have had time come to fruition? You've had more time, or is it a case of opposite direction? No, core officership has overtaken everything, and the compositional thing has just got to be on the back burner. Is there anything in the pipeline? Anything that you've had the time to do, or has it just gone the opposite direction?
I'm still sitting at the piano and waiting for inspiration and waiting for doodling to happen. There's you've mentioned Stephen Poxon. There's his one of his songs, and then Rob Little, and they're there. They are. There's germs of ideas that are coming, and composition is quite an interesting thing. Sometimes it happens fairly quickly, and you can get a song written or well, I don't know about brass music, but certainly for vocal, it's very quick and it's there. Others you have to spend a bit more time on and analyze what's been written and could I change that. But yes, it's there's always something going on. There's always something going on, I think, in composers' minds.
As a vocal composer, I mean, we've quoted Joy Webb. Peter Graham is very good at doing this. Have you ever come across band arrangements of your songs to pieces?
Only one.
Only one.
Only one.
I don't know. You see, because my vocal music history is compared to my band music history is that, and I will say I'm ashamed of that, but it's just how it's evolved.
Well, Ian, there's a piece of music called "Reasons Why," which I wrote with Keith Banks. That was
Ian Feltwell.
And Ian Feltwell wrote.
I've played it.
Called "Reasons Why," and it includes another popular song by Andre Crouch, I think, and he interspersed that with my arrangement of "Reasons Why," and it's called "Reasons Why." The piece is called "Reasons Why," and I think Melbourne Staff Band have recorded it, and that's the only one I know of.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask a double-barreled question. There's no QI blips if you get this wrong or if you can't remember. Bible quotation on your commission as a Salvation Army officer, can you remember it? And your own personal favourite Bible scripture at the moment.
In all your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your paths. That's my favourite at the moment, and that's been a favourite for a long time. I'm trying to think, I was commissioned in 1988. And I'm trying to think if we actually had a Bible verse. I think it was because we were messengers of joy. John Larson, who was our training principal at the time, he used to quote this: "Let no one rob you of your joy. Joy comes with Jesus." Now that's a paraphrase of some words from the New Testament, but that has really, I hope I've expressed the joy of Jesus in my life as an officer and as a person, actually, and through the music that I've been privileged to write.
Yeah. When you got accepted to go into training college, did you know then that you were going to be a Messengers of Joy, or was it just, when did you know what session you were going to be, what the session name was?
Yeah, I think I did know. I think I'm trying to think of the process. Chick and Margaret Ewell were the officers at Bristol Citadel at the time where I was, and they were very influential in suggesting that I might like to consider becoming an officer. Let's put it that way.
That doesn't surprise me.
They were great corps officers, and again, they were very influential in me making my decision. I don't think I knew exactly what year I was going to go in, but it so happened that I went in 1986.
Yeah, I just find it interesting. You say you hope you've done, you're a messenger of joy. I wonder whether you get soldiers, candidates who go in not having a clue what their session aim, and it's kind of, do you know what? If I hadn't have thought God was behind that, I wouldn't
Yeah.
have. That just fits perfect. Like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
I'm glad I'm not a faithful
Yes.
intercessor because I can't even pronounce it.
Sure, sure, sure.
So yeah, it's been absolutely wonderful to speak to someone from the vocal side. It's
Yeah.
not been by any means deliberate. It's just those people who volunteered to come forward have seemed to be more brass than vocal. So I thank you for taking the time
Yeah.
to talk about the vocal side of things, the difference. Is it just a case of you prefer vocal? Is that the reason why you've never entered into the brass band foray, even though you enjoy the brass banding? Is there not a secret Martin March in the offering, or is it just something you're not interested in doing?
There is. I'm smiling because I'm looking back to a time when I had to write a piece of brass composition. I did an MA at Leeds University in about 15 years ago, and my professor was Philip Wilby.
Oh,
And
with.
one of the modules was to write. He asked me to write a piece of music for brass band, and I'd never written a piece. I have enough difficulty with 2 staves, let alone 12 staves. But that was the commission. I had to write a piece of music. So I wrote it almost exclusively on Sibelius. So it was literally on Sibelius.
Mm-hmm.
And cheekily, I contacted Steve Cobb and said to Steve Cobb, I need a recording of this march. Would you mind if the staff band recorded it? Graciously, he said yes. So there is a recording of the staff band playing my one and only unpublished, and it will never be published, called Victory Secure. It's absolutely dreadful. Not the band playing of it, but I wish I could, because I'd love to be a brass band composer, but it's just too technical for me.
Okay.
And after my experience with Victory Secure, I don't trust myself.
You realise now that I'm going to ask for a copy of that recording.
I thought that you might.
Yeah.
I think I've lost it in the moose, actually.
Oh, what? Even the audio recording?
It might be somewhere. I've definitely got the script. I've definitely got the score.
Okay, well, we're not going to go into brass because that's not the point of this.
But the interesting thing, when I took it to Philip Wilby, he sat at a grand piano, and from the full score, he actually played it on the piano from the 16 staves, and he called it wild. He said, this is wild. So from him, I took that as a bit of a compliment.
What's in a Victory Secure, just out of curiosity?
Well, it's based on the tune Ratchi.
Okay.
Bum, 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 victory is secure.
Yeah,
the words of the third verse.
Yeah, it was ringing a distant bell.
Yeah.
But I just wondered whether, because you're at university, it was a case of write anything, or the hardened bandsman in you said, I've got to write a march, right, let's put a hymn tune in, and no one at the university is going to have a clue.
Yeah. I had to include an army tune somewhere along the line, just in case it would have been published, but it will never be.
Did you not, even though Steve Cobb knows it exists?
He hasn't mentioned it ever since.
Oh dear. We've let the cat out the bag now. A new entrant in our Unity Series band bill, it's John Martin. But I think your vocal compositions are, just wonderful enough for people to be able to latch onto and to say, yeah, here's a guy who obviously knows he has a gift and is willing to let God wrangle it out of him and give him inspiration. So I'm going to pray with you, and if you wish to, dance around the room, stand on your head, whatever takes your fancy, as always. But dear Lord, a privilege to pray, speak, joke, laugh, guide, and just converse with John about his musical skills, his compositional technique, the stories behind the compositions. Every piece of music has a story. And we thank you for his love for you, Lord, his willingness to follow you, Lord, and that, like so many other, probably every other Christian, that's a multifaceted journey, Lord. And we thank you that many songster brigades have been blessed, many choirs have been blessed. Many musical ensembles have been blessed. We have to try and keep in our memories, Lord, that the notes on the written page can be sung by the whosoever to bring glory to you, Lord, so you can go out and we can use it to save the whosoever. That, yes, we might think of the international star songsters or Boscombe songsters or Bristol songsters singing the latest epic or the latest little ditty, but it's those 4 girls, those 2 boys in the singing company who want to sing it on a Sunday morning as a duet, as a solo, and this is the song that's touched them. So we thank you for that musical ability. We thank you for the inspirators, the mentors, the parents, and the local musical leaders who sat down and said, yes, there's something there, carry on. Let's give this a go out. Let's encourage the local YP band and the local singing company to sing it out. And I thank you that gift of music is something that we absolutely adore in the Salvation Army, but we sometimes let the music become bigger than the intention, which is to glorify you, Lord, and bring people to you. And I thank you for John's commitment. I thank you for his family's love and the support and understanding that goes on there. Many Salvation Army composer families have said that lock away Dad so he can get on with the music, so he stopped the whistling and the la-laing around the dinner table. It can be a very painful experience, but at the end of the day, Lord, it's given as a tribute to you, Lord, a dedication for you to give to other people, to bless other people, and to bring other people to God. And we thank you so much for that experience, for that class, for that uniqueness, and for that talent, Lord. And I thank you so much for the time and the investment of time and talent in John as he keeps going in his pathway, Lord, as a Salvation Army officer, as a minister of religion, as a father, as a brother and sister, to whoever, for his family, his friends, his comrades, divisional HQ, territorial HQ, even international HQ. We are one army, one mission, one message. And I thank you for that, Lord. And I just want to pray specifically for John and his family right now, that you will guard them, guide them, bless them, keep them safe, keep them peaceful in the midst of all this palaver that's going on, and know that when they need to turn to you, Lord, you are there waiting for it, and you will have the answer. And they will know in their hearts that the answer will come when it's ready and when it's right, Lord. So I just thank you for that, Lord, and ask your blessings upon the family and John right now. Amen.
Amen.
Right, I will